Welcome back for video 2. So let's go ahead and look at PowerPoint 2 here. So this is going to be Introduction to Human Movement Science. All right. So human movement science, what are we talking about? We are talking about the study of your muscular, nervous, and skeletal systems, right? So we kind of have some, I like how they kind of break this down here. You've got your muscular, which is like talking about functional anatomy, so understanding what your muscles are, right? You have the articular, which is your skeletal system. That talks about like how your bones move in particular, and how they're designed to move versus how they normally move, right? Like normally you are supposed to sit in neutral, but a lot of people tend to move their bones into these kind of altered postures. And then you have like neural, which is your motor behavior, right? Like that's how your nervous system kind of controls all that stuff that we just talked about. So that's kind of the study of the human movement system. And we use a big term to kind of describe all of this, which is biomechanics, right? So biomechanics is the study of how our body interacts with like external forces, right? It is the study of how the body reacts, interacts with internal and external forces. God, ears are clogged. So a big part of biomechanics includes our anatomic terminology. You guys will remember this, but anatomic terminology is where we start describing like superior versus inferior, lateral versus medial, distal versus proximal, right? By the way, I came up with that the other day and I was like, that's a good way to think of it, like medial, lateral, it's superior, inferior, and then proximal, distal. And we just go at an angle. So another part of this is obviously our planes of motion, right? Which are 3 imaginary bisectors that divide the body at right angles to each other. Right? So we've got the sagittal plane. Is that on the next slide? Yes. We got the sagittal plane, which is going to be divide the body into left, right halves. So examples of sagittal motions are things like walking. Walking is very sagittal, right? That's you're moving along the plane, right? So I'm moving front to back like this. Flexion and extension are examples of this, right? Those are sagittal movements. Then we have the frontal plane, which is going to divides the body into front and back halves, right? So again, I'm going to move along the plane. If I'm getting divided down the middle here, I would move like this. Our classic examples of that are abduction and adduction, but there's also like lateral flexion. I'll put a little asterisk next to that one because that one's not actually on the list in the PowerPoint, but lateral flexion, right? This type of motion. Then we have got the transverse movements, which are going to divide body into upper and lower halves, right? So that's going to move along like this way, right? So like internal versus external rotation. But then we also have like our special horizontal abduction and horizontal adduction, right? That is also an example of a transverse plane movement. So those are our planes of motion there. Then we got a few special ones, right? We have our combined joint actions. Actually, hold on. Asterisk, asterisk. Which are, you know, not particular to any plane, right? So we have like, in fact, are we getting scapular motions up here? No, we are not. We're just diving into like pronation and supination, which are really important to today's conversation. So do you guys remember how I kind of have touched on pronation and supination in the past, but we haven't really spent a ton of time focusing on those movements, right? Like, remember, pronation is a combo movement, right? It is like, here's my feet neutral, right? I've got a nice arch, my toes are pointing straight forward. Pronation is where I evert my foot, which is very much a frontal plane motion, right? So if I evert my foot, I'm going to try, and it's impossible because your joints are all connected. So I literally cannot do this. But I'm going to try to minimize and only evert. So if I just evert, I'm going to try and keep my feet, I'm trying to keep my knees out of this. There's just the eversion part, right? And this is incredibly uncomfortable. Like my foot's cramping like crazy. But that's eversion. Pronation is a little bit of eversion. It's also a little bit of dorsiflexion. I'm actually going to pull up slightly with my ankle here. That's going to put a lot of pressure onto my heels, right? So now I'm putting a lot of pressure on my heels. Can't really see that. It's really subtle. But then it is also external rotation. And that's going to further drive my knees in, actually. I'm trying really hard to keep my knees out of this, but you can see I'm internally rotating and adducting my knees, even though I'm not really trying to. But that's pronation. Oh, God, hold on. That is an example of that, right? My freaking TFL is like, why are you doing this? So that's eversion, right? That leads to these tight muscles up the kinetic chain. And like, God, I can, it literally travels all the way up kinetic chain. Like I can feel my back hurts a little bit after standing like that. So that's pronation. And supination is the exact opposite, right? That's why you see so many people who like stand like this, by the way. That's that classic example of too much pronation. You also will sometimes see people who do this version. They'll like invert and like their knees will bow. Very uncommon in regular populations, more common in sports populations. You will sometimes see this amongst some types of athletes. You'll see like that is excessive inversion of the foot, internal rotation, and supination. This person tends to put a lot of their weight forward. And so you'll even see sometimes people who stand like this. And that's excessive like supination. So pronation and supination are both combo movements that exist, consist of all kinds of things. Now, they're not mentioning the scapula here, so I'm going to add the scapular motions real quick, just so we have them in our notes again. So combined joint actions, right? Movements where, right? Movements where one joint actually actively affects another one.
Brad, I think Jay's trying to ask a question, but can barely hear him.
Oh, are you, Jay?
Can you hear me?
Oh, God, I can now.
Okay.
Let me turn my volume up. What's up?
Is supination a combination of tibial external rotation, ankle inversion, and dorsiflexion?
Close. It is so for anybody who can't hear, because
yeah, we couldn't hear. Could you repeat it?
Yeah. So for the you're good. I scared myself. So for those of you who couldn't hear, the question was if pronation is excessive dorsiflexion, excessive eversion, and excessive external rotation, is supination, and then Jay, I think what you said, if I'm not mistaken, was, is that inversion? Yes, it is. Is it plantar flexion instead of dorsiflexion? Yes, it is. But I think you asked if it's external rotation. This would be internal rotation. So that they're all three are flipped. It's internal rotation instead of external. It's inversion instead of eversion, and it is
Internal
what did I
rotation.
say? I said external rotation and inversion. It's oh my God, plantar flexion instead of supination. I kept getting lost in my own pattern there. So that is, yeah, it's exactly the opposite, Jay.
Okay.
what happened? I wonder what happened to my. You know what,
I don't know.
Jay?
I'm trying to talk into
Check
it.
for this. Deborah, this is what you and I were talking about, I think, yesterday. Check to see if your headphones are automatically plugged in and across the room. Because I make that mistake a lot. And then you just hear something from like, why can't I hear my music playing? So movements where one joint affects another, those are your combined joint actions. These are things like scapular movements, right? So scapular movements, right? Like scapular retraction, scapular protraction, scapular elevation, and scapular depression, right? So this, and this. All of those are your special scapular movements. Then getting into the ankle is special as well. Foot and ankle movements. And we are going to spend some special time on the foot and ankle stuff here because it's athletics, right? Like obviously this is where we experience a lot of those things. So we see pronation and supination. So I'm putting these in bold because we are going to go over them in particular. But pronation, like when we see what is called pronation distortion syndrome, right? This is going to be a combination of ankle eversion, dorsiflexion, and external rotation, right? Very, very commonly leads to ankle sprains. Again, so many people deal with this, right? And you guys heard, like, for those of you who came to our workshop, I fell into a classic trap, which is like, I love talking it. It's funny. I don't give a crap about what shoes I wear. I literally have like 6 pairs of shoes. You know, 2 of them are my gym. Like I have 2 pairs of gym shoes that I go back and forth with. So I have like a pair of dress black shoes, dress like wingtip brown shoes, and then I have like 1 pair of like halfway casual like Converses. Then I have my athletic shoes. That's the list. So, you know, it's kind of funny, like for somebody who taught, but I love talking about like the modern athletic shoe. I love that conversation because like we've kind of made more and more padding for shoes, you know, over time. I mean, look at like modern running shoes. They have thicker and thicker soles. That is taking away from like your proprioception. Like your foot doesn't feel the ground anymore. And so it doesn't have to be like as strong or deal with like things as quickly. You know, like I stepped on I'm moving and there's all this nuts and bolts and screws all over my freaking room right now. I keep stepping on them. But luckily, like I have fairly good foot proprioception. And so I pull my foot up real quick. You know, if I got used to wearing like shoes that don't have that contact to the ground, I lose that proprioception, you know? So there's that. Then also there's elevation, which puts you into like these tight muscles. So then if you ever change like that pair of shoe that doesn't have as much elevation, you are in dorsiflexion being stretched out. And so your body doesn't want to stretch out because it's used to being in this position all day. So then what it does instead is it does external rotation. And now suddenly you're falling into that bad eversion habit as well, because it's a combination movement. You start supinating. And you'll see it, like you'll see like supinated runners, or pronated runners. If I look at that, like excessive pronation during run. So you'll see runners who have like these kind of big kinks in their running, like excessive pronators. They'll run with their feet turning out. You can see the side of his foot, even though this is a particularly like posterior view. And there's like excessive supination, right? So both of those are not awesome, you know. Not saying that you can't have some ankle turn, you know. It actually, like if you're a barefoot style runner, you actually do want to have a little inversion when you run. Your steps should actually somewhat be like inverted so that you can roll to the ball of your feet before getting into your next one. Not as much as I was exaggerating there, but slightly. That actually is okay. But again, if you don't have a strong enough foot to kind of support that, it can lead to things like ankle sprains. So that's why we're spending a little more time on pronation and supination here. These are things that happen in sports like athletics all the freaking time, right? So that poor control can lead to injury. So we see the internal rotation. You know, when we see like all of that external stuff happening in the ankle, the tibia and the femur and the pelvis all start to like try to compensate in the opposite direction to get you back to neutral. Just like if I like lean back with my, if I try to stand straight, if I just lean back with my upper body, my lower body shifts forward, and now I'm evenly distributed. Or if I lean forward here, I might kick my butt out like that, and now I'm evenly distributed. That's like I'm standing like the freaking president. All right, I gotta not stray into that topic. Yeah, question.
Yeah, I used to run a lot, and I'm flat-footed, and after a while I just started getting a lot of shin issues, and slowly but surely, like, of course my ankle started was like hurting. So, and someone recently told me, oh, you need to change your shoes, but now I'm just kind of like, I don't even know how to even go about that. So any recommendations?
Yeah, so if you're flat-footed, I don't recommend going straight to like a minimalist shoe. Like I'm definitely not a fan of that idea. Same thing if you've ever struggled with like, you know, shin splints, fasciitis, runner's knee, runner's hip. Those are all very common injuries associated with excessive pronation. I don't recommend going straight to a minimalist shoe, just because like that's going to be a lot really fast, especially if like you are structurally born flat-footed. Like that's a hard thing to like overcome and work on. But here's my recommendation: get yourself. I would start with like a tennis ball, then move to a lacrosse ball, then move to like a golf ball, and roll the bottom of your foot. Like get that fascia kind of broken up, get any tightness on there like broken up, and just roll the heck out of the bottom. I'm using my other foot here, but roll the heck out of the bottom of your foot. And then anytime you are training, like get up on one leg, make sure that like you are standing on one leg, but you are gripping with basically like 3 points of contact, like one under like the you know behind your big toe, but on the ball of the foot there, one on the outside where your pinky toe is, and one in your heel. It helps before you start doing your exercise. Line yourself up to where it is like straightforward. Like don't let yourself go into this habit. Get it straight, and then screw your foot into the floor. So like grip. I want you to really actually like picture like you're pushing. Like I think of it like a like a prescription medicine, right? Like a childproof like medicine cap. You push down and you screw, right? Picture doing that with your foot while still keeping it in that alignment. And then squeeze your same side glute. And if you're doing shoulder presses, you're doing single leg shoulder presses. If you're doing bicep curls, from now on, you're doing single leg bicep curls. That little adjustment is going to be huge. And that's where it starts. When you're brushing your teeth, get up on one leg, you know, brush your teeth. You're doing the dishes, stand there on one leg, do the dishes. That little bit of balance work is huge for strengthening those things. And then in particular, Nancy, if you've also got shin splints, you're going to want to also strengthen your tibial muscles. So when you are standing on one leg, I want you to focus on pulling your toes upwards, like try to reach for the ceiling as much as you can. And I would also probably give you some resisted dorsiflexion. So I would, if I were training you, have a rubber band around your foot going that way, and then you would pull against it like that. and then you would go back, pull against like that. That's going to strengthen your tibial muscles, which will really, really, really help with shin splints. This, by the way, this is the class where we're going to teach what I just said.
Got it.
Remember I said there's an injury prevention day? It's at the very end of the class. That's the day where we're going to break down, I'm trying to remember which ones we go through, but we go through fasciitis, we go through shin splints, runner's knee, runner's hip, jumper's knee, shoulder impingement, and I think we get golfer's elbow and tennis elbow as well. What was that, Nancy? I'm sorry.
Sorry, I was just hearing Frankie first, so I was like, wait, what did he say?
Oh, yeah. Let's see here. I got the...
But he muted already. It's okay.
Yeah. Day 8. That's where we're going to kind of get into all that stuff. So we will tackle it. I will warn you, we are tackling it. We tackle it very basically, and then all that stuff comes back in super advanced form when you get to capstone. That's where you start studying the corrective exercise textbook, and that's like, you know, that's the injury prevention textbook. So it's like you get one chapter in this book, and then you get a whole book in capstone. So
nice.
we will kind of touch on it this time. So that's, you know, something to look forward to.
Sweet.
Yeah.
Thank you.
All right. Let's go ahead and look at supination here. So supination, a combination of ankle inversion, plantar flexion, and internal rotation. Oh, shoot, I forgot. So that often, or I'm sorry, not even often, just leads to external, I forgot to put this up here, external rotation, I'm sorry, internal rotation. I'm reading the wrong slide here. Internal rotation of the tibia, femur, and then we go down here, and it's like the exact opposite, right? Leads to external rotation of the tibia, femur, and hip. So when you pronate, right, your knees cave in response. So your tibia, femur, and then that's affecting my hip joint. And when you supinate, the exact opposite happens. This is basically knees cave in versus knees cave out on the overhead squat. Okay, so there are some of our those are all of our joint actions, right? There's our biomechanics in a nutshell. Let's take a look at muscle actions again here real quick. I know it's review, but we're gonna review. Painted myself into a corner. So muscle actions, or we'll say the muscle action spectrum, because that's what it is.
Hey, Brad, can you break down that one more time for me? Anatomically from the hip down to the ankle.
Yeah.
In the process of supination.
Yeah. So pronation, right? Actually, you know what? I got a picture for you. It'll be even. I'll pull up I'll Google a picture of it because that's much better. Ankle pronation. Actually, you know what? What I want to see is pronation distortion syndrome. That's what I'm looking for. All right. So when you overpronate your foot, right? So it's external rotation, it's eversion because the bottom is going to show out this way, right? All of this stuff is falling inwards here. That results in internal tibial rotation and internal femoral rotation, which is affecting your hip joint. That often causes the pelvis to tilt a little bit as well, which is why those are often commonly associated with each other. Doesn't have to be, but sometimes is. And so we see pronation distortion and lower cross syndrome, often two sides of the same coin almost. But you can see here, right, that's that version there. This is going to be much difficult, but supination distortion syndrome. See if I can actually even get a picture of this. See, look, the internet is like, what are you talking about? Nobody deals with this. You mean pronation? Yeah, I wanted to find the same picture, but nobody studies it enough because it just is so very uncommon. But basically, supination, right, is you would see the opposite, like the foot would slightly cave this way, and then the knee would you know what? Actually, hold on. Knee.
It would be like knee varus, right?
Yeah, let me see if knee varus will pull up a picture. Kind of. I mean, I'm kind of getting what I want. Okay, so knee valgus, right? The knees caving in, and you can see the excessive Q angle here. See how that leads to a big gap on this side and like very little gap over here, versus like a normal knee, it's like evenly distributed, right? So knee valgus, there's like a rubbing that happens on this part of the knee. Knee varus, which is the knees caving out, there is a lack of Q angle. It's basically just 90 degrees straight down. So we have an excessive Q angle, and we have like a lack of Q angle here. And so there's a gap on this side versus a gap on this side. Both are problematic. It's just that knee varus is much less common. But you'll see it in kids who get into sports at a really young age. You know, sports normally make us a lot healthier. And, you know, I'm not knocking like coaches. I think just like a lot of like little league coaches and stuff don't have the traditional like strength training that a lot of trainers do. But they often do like a lot of drills focusing on one particular type of movement, which then leads to like overactivity because they're only doing one particular type of movement. And so sometimes you'll see like athletic populations with the excessive supination. And then sometimes people are just born with it, or their habits, you know. So yeah, that's kind of what we see there. They're opposites of each other.
Because in the notes, you know, it says tibia leads to internal rotation of the tibia, femur, and hip, but it's external rotation of the tibia, right? Tibial external rotation, right?
In relation, oh, I see what you're going for.
That's why I'm like,
yeah, you're talking about like how the biceps femoris kind of plays into all of this. Yeah, so if I go here, right, and I externally rotate my tibia, my small biceps femoris is in charge of that. But like that's turning my foot this way, but this is all internally rotating. This is external in relation to this. So it is external rotation in relation to this.
As the
reference.
reference.
Go back to the anatomic position, right? It's internal in rotation in relation to like the anatomic position. So yeah, but that's always like really confusing. Yeah, but like when this bone is like this big bone is situated over here, now this is very much external, but it's still being rotated this way.
Got you. Okay, perfect. That's what I was alluding to, or that's what I was referring to.
Yeah, I used to get stuck on that. I still get turned around on that. Like sometimes when I'm talking too fast, I'll goof that up. Because it is like it's like it has context, you know.
Right.
There has to be like context for what body part you're talking about, and if you give no context, then it is always referring to the anatomic position.
Yes. Yeah, because I get it totally, but I just never seen it written down like that. So that's why I had to. Yeah. Okay.
That's just one more reason to hate the biceps femoris, man.
Right.
Stupid, always overactive muscle that I spend my career working on because it's what everybody struggles with.
Yeah, man. Whew.
Hate that thing.
When I'm running, my right foot, it externally rotates. So I always have to stretch my body, do that bicep femoris stretch that you showed me.
I think that's driving's fault. I think that I think when you're sitting in the car, you know, like especially like if you're driving automatic, like if you have long legs, like I'm constantly sitting, like this is how I drive. I'm in this position, like this leg sits neutral and this leg sits at an angle like this, and I'm controlling my gas and brake. And so like I kick this over constantly. Like that is a horrible posture.
Yeah.
We drive all the time. I mean, we're in freaking Los Angeles. It takes an hour to get to the gym to work on that muscle. All right, let's knock out our muscle action spectrum. So this is going to describe the various contractions our muscles make under different types of resistance, right? So you have got eccentric contractions. Now we're going to break this down just slightly different here. We're going to add a new term today when we get to isometric, but let's start with eccentric. Eccentric contractions. I know you guys already know this, but these are muscle contractions that occur when a muscle is lengthening. So it is the deceleration movements, right? That's eccentric. So if I caught something and descended it down towards the ground, like I'm decelerating it, right? It had a lot of speed and I'm slowing it down. That's eccentric, right? That resistance is overcoming me. So the tension generated by the muscle is less than the resistive force. So 100 pounds is being dropped on my head, and I'm generating, let's say, 99 pounds of force. I'm decelerating it, right? It is gonna go all the way to the floor. I'm just kind of controlling it on the way down. My muscles generated less force, therefore my muscle lengthened, right? So very, very, very important here. This is the first step of a stretch shortening cycle, right? So this is the first part of a stretch shortening cycle. You have to lengthen before you can shorten, which is the next part, right? So I got force deceleration. We can also think of this as force reduction. There we go. So we got 4 little terms there to think of eccentric, right? It's lengthening, it's decelerating, the tension is less than the resistive force. It's the first part of a stretch shortening cycle. We consider this force reduction. Then we have isometric. Where'd it go? Isometric. These are where the muscle contractions that occur when the muscle is remaining the same length. So your muscle length is going to remain constant, right? So this is not deceleration, this is stabilization. And the tension generated by the muscle is the same as the resistive force. And this is the stabilizing portion. Actually, I'm sorry, not even that. It's the transitional portion of a stretch shortening cycle. What did I do? Oh. Okay, so this is your transitional period, and which is going to lead me to a little term here that I got to put because this is going to come up in a few days. This is what we're going to refer to as amortization. Okay, amortization is a special term that we use when we are describing explosive movements. So, when you are moving slowly in the gym, like let's say I'm doing a 4-2-1 tempo, right? I would go 1, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4, right? It would look like this. I've got my concentric, I've got my isometric, I've got my eccentric portions, right? That is standard. Now, let's say, and you would never do explosive with a single joint movement like a bicep curl, but it's the easiest for me to show you on camera. Let's say I'm going to be really explosive about this. If I wanted to make my bicep be super explosive, I would drop it like this. I would lengthen the muscle, and then I would shorten the muscle, and I want the time between the two to be as short as possible. I do not want there to be very much time. That amount of time that exists, though, rather than calling it isometric, we use a special term when we're describing explosive movements. We call that transition time amortization. It's the transition between moving from eccentric to concentric. Amortization, by the way, is a term that any of my people in here who've ever done like investments or finance, is a term that describes like, you know how they say you got to spend money to make money? Well, the time in between, that's your amortization. It's the time where it's like, I'm losing money, and I've transitioned and I'm making money, right? That's amortization. It's the transitional period. So if I'm here and I like explode super quickly like that, the amount of time from when my muscle is at its maximal length and going back and transitioning, that's amortization. So it is the transitional period of stabilization that occurs between rapid eccentric and concentric contractions. So we want our amortization, we want the transition to be as short as possible. We do not want to spend time transitioning because that is going to lead to a reduction in power. You know, the longer you hold your isometric, the more power you lose because your nervous system has time to realize it doesn't need to contract that hard and shorten the muscle. Remember, we want to kind of freak the nervous system out to make it contract. We lose that contraction the longer we hold our isometrics. So we use a special term when we're describing like explosive movements. That special term is going to be amortization. So this is used as force stabilization. And then we have the concentric contraction, which is sort of the easy one that everybody always thinks of. Concentric contractions are muscle contractions that occur when the muscle is shortening. Boo. So this is acceleration, right? This is when the tension generated by the muscle is greater than the resistive force. Or you can think of it as the final part of the stretch shortening cycle, right? This is where the actual exploding happens on the stretch shortening cycle when you are trying to be explosive. This is force production. So really important stuff there when it comes back to our types of contractions. Now we got a couple terms that are just I'm gonna kind of review these just really quickly. We don't have to put them in your notes. Actually, you know what, we'll do the notes, it doesn't take that long. Length tension relationships and force velocity curves. These are both two very important things. Again, they come up every time we talk about how we move, but a length tension relationship, right? I'll put a little space in between these. Length tension relationship is the resting length of a muscle and the amount of tension that it can generate at that length, right? You can also think of this as the optimal resting length, the optimal overlap of actin-myosin fibers, right? That's what a good length tension relationship is. When your muscles sit at the posture they are designed to sit at, they can move really effectively. But if they are pulled into a shortened state or a lengthened state, they cannot move very effectively. So when you are, pronating, right, which maybe means that you're adducting the knees, right? My glutes being turned off and my adductors are being turned on, but they are both weaker than they should be. This is weaker because it's in a shortened state. This is weaker because it's in a lengthened state. And that is a length tension relationship. That can affect another concept that's important for athletics, force velocity curve. So your force velocity curve is the ability of the muscles to generate force with increasing velocity. So basically, the more you go through your contraction, your ability to generate force decreases, but your ability to generate velocity increases. You can basically think of it as like momentum, right? When you first come off that, Jay, like this is a great one for you, because like when you first come off the block, that should be the slowest part of the race, you know? It's where you need to be the most explosive, right? But
Right.
it is actually, like, if you track how fast you're traveling,
Right.
the slowest part of a 100-meter dash, because you're coming from nothing. And so you're
Right.
picking up speed, right?
Right.
But it is where you are generating the greatest amount of force.
Yes.
So, like, there's a ton of force to get you off the block, and then less force, less force, less force, because you are picking up more and more and more momentum.
Uh-huh.
So there's an inverse relationship between force and velocity. They are opposites of each other. So force, actually, we'll put that down here. Force and velocity, oh, it's in the PowerPoint. Force and velocity have an inverse relationship, right? So high force equals low velocity, right? Picture a bowling ball. Low force, high velocity equals low force, right?
It's just like time and intensity, right?
What's that?
Just like time and intensity.
Yeah, just like time and intensity. Can't wait to see everyone's reaction. Oh, yeah, absolutely. That's funny. I love that. I just noticed that chat bubble from earlier. But yeah, just like time and intensity, right? They're opposites of each other. But we know that we want to have high levels of both in order to be an effective athlete. And that's where, like, training with NASM's style of power training, like, the reason NASM does the, the heavy lift first and the super light explosive lift second superset thing, right? Like heavy bench press, medicine ball chest pass, right? You pair those two up, you are addressing both sides of the equation. You're addressing the force and you're addressing the velocity. Both are going up. You know, if you have good high levels of both, you're going to be an even better athlete. So we need to be aware of the curve, because, like, you don't want to peak too early and then, start to, like, slow down. When we are, like, doing these movements, we need to know, like, how to generate force in the most important, sections of whatever sport we're talking about. So these are our definitions for force and velocity. I'm not going to put those down. That was actually what I remember skipping this light. Yeah, you're not going to see those for a while. But force is like how much, you can think of that as like the weight almost. But that's going to either result in acceleration or deceleration. That's what force is. And then velocity is the speed at which something is traveling. And that's that curve there, right? So when force is high, velocity is low. When velocity is high, force is low. Then we got force couples. That's another one that we always talk about. Remember, a force couple is where synergistic muscles are working around a specific joint. So the synergistic action of multiple muscles working around a joint. So your scapula, it's the perfect example, right? As I raise my arm through, like, my full range of motion, some muscles are pulling upwards, some muscles are stabilizing this way, and some muscles are pulling downwards, downwards. So that is your force couple there. Then we got our levers. I'm not going to go through levers because you never get tested on levers. But 3 classes, right? You got first class levers, second class lever, third class levers. The important thing to know about that is that the further your resistive force is away from your axis of rotation, the more torque there is. And so basically the way to kind of think about this, and it's why, like, you think about, like, how much you guys can barbell squat, like, these are really large muscles. You can barbell squat, like, a lot of weight, but, like, you can also oftentimes just calf press that weight too, right? Like, or at least a very similar, like, heavy-ish weight related to it. It's kind of funny. It's like, wait a minute, I'm using all these muscles to do that, but then, like, this one little tiny calf muscle can do all the lifting. And it's just because it's a much more effective lever. The lever is closer to the axis, and so it has more leverage, which makes it easier for it to be able to move. It doesn't have to be a large muscle, And the exact opposite is true in other ways. You might be able to bench press a lot of weight, but then all of a sudden you go to do, like, a little, like a, like a reverse fly. The reason a reverse fly is so hard is not because the muscles are weaker, it's because of how far away the cable is from where you're pivoting. This being here versus here is going to make 5 pounds feel a lot heavier than if I had it like this. If I pulled from here to here, because now it's, you know, this far away versus being this far away. That's torque, and that's why levers are important. But we don't test on levers, so we're going to go past that.
Brad, torque reduction is reduced the further away the weight is from the axis point. Is that correct?
Rephrase that. Sorry.
Is torque reduced the further away the weight is from the axis point?
Other way around. Torque is increased. Torque is the perception. You can think of it as like the perception of how heavy something feels. Let's say you get a client. Let's say you got a client who's doing like you have lateral raises built into your program, right? And they can do 5 pounds. You work at a gym that doesn't have 8-pound weights, so you got to jump them straight to 10. And they try to do 10, and they're like, oh, and they got to like keep cheating. And they're not able to do it. So what you can do is you can have them do like this version, which brings the weight closer to the axis. So you reduce the torque. And then by reducing the torque, it feels much lighter.
Got you. Okay. So it's like a psychological manipulation thing.
In that example that I gave, it's not just psychological. It literally is lighter. It's not just
It's lighter
psychological.
for me, for sure.
Yeah, it's physically lighter. It's like when you see like a series of pulleys. I don't know how to Google this. A series of pulleys and levers. Okay. So, oh wait, actually, I lost it. There was a picture on the first page that was really good. Oh, it's a video. I can't pull that up. Okay, see this video right here, and you see how like there's 1, 2, 3, 4, like there's a bunch of different levers. By having each of those, how much that box, how heavy it feels, is literally reduced every single time. Every time there's another lever, that brings the axis closer and closer and closer, and so it makes it physically lighter.
Okay, so more torque, the heavier, the less torque, the lighter.
Perfect. Yep.
Got it.
There you go.
Okay.
Yeah, I didn't mean to make just a perception thing. That was definitely not the way I should have said that.
I get I think that's just, yeah.
But yeah, it is a sneaky way of like making the exercise easier for your client. Okay.
Cool.
So that's a couple of our key terms. Looking at some anatomy here. A lot of times when we're studying anatomy, we're going to isolate the different components, right? This is where we talk about a muscle, if it's an agonist or an antagonist or a stabilizer or a synergist, right? So we're going to see our muscles as movers is what I like to call this, because that's what's called in your original textbook. But if we look at like muscles as movers here, ooh, none of that. No double spacing. You get an agonist, right? The main muscle responsible for a particular movement, right? It is the prime mover. What did I do wrong? I probably doubled up. So classic example, the gluteus maximus is responsible for hip extension. Actually, not responsible, let's say is the prime mover. So then you got an antagonist. That is the opposite of a prime mover. Or agonist, right? It's the opposite of that. So for instance, your the hip flexor complex is the antagonist of the of hip extension. Right? So the hip flexor complex is the antagonist of hip extension. It's in charge of hip flexion instead of hip extension. But then you've got synergists, which is muscles that assist prime movers, right? And so a good example of that is the hamstrings assist in hip extension, right? Weakly, but a little. And then you got stabilizers, which muscles that support and stabilize the body during functional movement patterns, right? So for instance, like the transverse abdominis stabilizes the spine during hip extension, right? So there's kind of our muscles as movers again, right? You've got agonist, antagonist, synergist, and stabilizers. Let's use a different example. Let's say we are describing like horizontal adduction, right? We'll describe like a bench press. My pectoralis major is primarily responsible for horizontal adduction, right? So it would be the agonist. Meanwhile, my deltoid is there to assist. So that would be considered a synergist. Meanwhile, like my rhomboids and posterior deltoid are responsible, actually not my rhomboids, but my posterior deltoid is responsible for horizontal abduction. Therefore, that is the exact opposite muscle. Meanwhile, my rotator cuff is stabilizing my shoulder joint as I am moving through that motion. And, you know, we could go even to the same body parts, right? If I'm looking at spinal flexion, my rectus abdominis is my prime mover. My erector spinae is my antagonist. Synergists are going to be like my oblique muscles. They do a little bit, right? They're primarily responsible for this type of movement, but they do a little bit of that as well. So they would be considered synergists. Meanwhile, my transverse abdominis are keeping my discs in place during that movement. So I just want to give you guys some different examples. We always use the hips. The glutes are the classic example because everybody's got a weak butt. So then we've got your joint systems here. We will dive more into this when we get to our core day. So I'm going to leave this one alone because I know this shows up again. But you do have these support stabilizing systems, which are like what we call your local stabilization system, right? That's going to be your transverse abdominis, your multifidus, which is stabilizing on the back of your spine, internal obliques, pelvic floor muscles, and diaphragm, right? Now, me personally, and this is like a personal opinion, but when we talk about like core training, a lot of times we're talking about like near the spine and lumbopelvic hip complex, which is totally important and should not be underwritten. But a lot of times when I think of the core, I'm also thinking of the rotator cuff because it's stabilizing your entire arm attached to your body. And when you define like the core, it's this thing that stabilizes your body, right? We're really describing like all of these stabilizer muscles. And in my opinion, your rotator cuff should actually be part of that conversation, which is why like I like to incorporate like a lot of shoulder stuff whenever I'm doing balance training, because balance training is really close to my core training. So it's really kind of becomes like a continuation of that. Single leg, external cable rotations, one of my favorite exercises. Or single leg, like, you know, Y raises, both those are great.
I've been doing a lot of that kind of stuff lately. Those single leg external rotating with dumbbells.
Oh, you've been doing that lately?
Yeah, that's been good.
Yeah,
it's been
that's
really
good, man. Just like simple as this. It's really good for you.
Yeah.
So that's your local stabilization system. Then you also have your global muscular system. This is all your movement stuff, right? So we just talked about like keeping everything in place. Well, we also got to be able to actually move it around as well. That's where like your gluteus and rectus muscles come in. The reason we're talking about this right now is because most people tend to have a really strong movement system and a relatively weak stabilization system. So they get good at like moving the body from point A to point B, but then like they don't get good at like stabilizing it in between. So what happens is like as they are moving, the internal stuff like your spine or like even just like internal joints get pulled away that they're really not like ready to, and so they lack stabilization. And this is where we kind of, what's that?
I have a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
You know how like you were mentioning for homework you like give clients like to do cardio and stuff. Would doing like Pilates can that be part of like homework as well?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. Like I'll a lot of times I'll have clients who like cardio bar, or they really like yoga, or they really love Pilates. And so like when I'm designing a program, like I'll take that into account. Now I think Pilates is not necessarily very cardiovascular based a lot of times. Not that there aren't Pilates classes, but like Pilates is particularly based around core training. And I think that like the Pilates industry has noticed that there's like more space or like a more of a need for cardio as well. So now you see a lot of Pilates classes that start to incorporate like some cardio stuff, which is great. But yeah, like I often keep those two things separate. It's like I like stuff like Pilates. I love yoga. Actually, if Karina were here, we've often talked about this. She's like, my heart rate gets super up when I'm doing yoga. And it's like, I believe that's true, like mid pose, but it's certainly not like consistently up. And so it's doing waves, but then those waves are not as big as it would be for like high intensity interval training. So I wouldn't consider yoga cardio. And they have cardio yoga classes, you know, where they really make you move the whole time. But it's just not very, and the reason why people hate cardio is because it's kind of monotonous, right? It's just like over and it's just kind of boring. Well, the reason it's boring is because it's consistent, and consistency is kind of key when it comes to like heart rate elevation. So if I had a client who like told me like what they're doing, like are they doing Pilates and stuff, I would totally take that into account when writing my programs. So did that kind of answer your question, or did I pivot away from it?
Oh, I did.
Okay, cool.
Thank you.
Okay, so now this is something you're gonna preview here that will come back much deeper in Capstone, but there's kind of 4 key movement systems here. You've got what is called your deep longitudinal subsystem. So remember, you've got like stabilizing system, movement system. Movement system has 4 little subsystems that make up its whole thing. And so the deep longitudinal one, let me pull up a picture here. Your DLS, as we like to call it, is basically this section right here. From up high on one side, down low on the other. And then obviously, you know, it goes in both directions because you have 2 sides of your body. But like sort of the way one side affects the other one is sort of across the body like this. This is why you'll see a lot of pictures of this stuff. You'll see them always go from one side to another. Actually, this is the one that's in your textbook, I think. So your deep longitudinal subsystem is how your body stabilizes from one side to the other, right? There's more to that, but not in this book, so I'm gonna leave it there. You've also got your posterior oblique, or POS system. And so when you're looking at that, this is also going to be kind of moving across, but this one is much more like off to the side. It is oblique, right? So it's more across the side of the body. Latissimus dorsi, thoracolumbar fascia, right? All this stuff in here. Then you go down to like your sacroiliac joint, which is right here. But then you go to your gluteus maximus and medius on the other side. So your deep longitudinal subsystem and posterior oblique system are really similar. They're both back here. One wraps around the side of the body more than the other one does. Then you get your anterior oblique subsystem. I'm assuming you guys can kind of see the pattern here, right? It's going to go on the front side of the body from top to bottom, and then the lateral subsystem, right? Oblique and lateral both mean kind of on the outside, right? And that's going to be all this stuff along the side. So you want to think of it, it's basically all of your different fascial lines as they kind of wrap around your body to stabilize you. This is why, and I'll give you, I'm actually doing an example right now without even thinking about it, which is not good. But as I'm sitting here at my desk, I kind of am sitting into one leg like this. As I tilt from my lower body over this way, my upper body does the opposite and tilts this way. So my lower body's going over here, upper body's going over here. It's making that X. So it's crossing, it's wrapping around your body. The way I like to think of these subsystems is like if you are like saran wrapping something, or like, actually, if anybody in here has ever had to like bandage up somebody's knee and put like a bandage on, just for stabilization, like when you're doing the knee, the trick to it is going below the kneecap, above the kneecap, below the kneecap, above the kneecap, and like you wrap high to low and high to low, and you kind of go like this. That is exactly how your body actually wraps your muscles around. It goes in the front, here to here, here to here. I went all the way to the side. Here to here. It goes from the back, here to here, and then it goes wrapping slightly around from the back, around the side, like that. And then there's also just one on the sides, keeping everything down. And that's your lateral subsystem. Think of it as like the wrapper holding all your stuff in place. And I will leave it at that. And you will get to study those things more in depth when you get to Mo. And it's kind of fun. I mean, that stuff is like actually really functional, but this is why we like compound movements, right? This is why every trainer is like, you know, I think every trainer does this warm up at some point in their careers, like the classic, the lunge with a twist. It's why we do stuff like that, is because we are pairing upper to lower. And this is why it's important to understand, like, you know, a lateral ankle sprain leads to glute weakness, which will often lead to contralateral low back pain over here, which can sometimes lead to shoulder impingement up here, which is what the person who taught me kinesiology wrote her master's on. That was her master's thesis, was how an ankle sprain causes shoulder impingement. Questions on that one, guys?
If we, Brad, it would be good if we studied the terminology within the subsystems.
Not necessarily. No, to be honest, Jay, it's actually not going to help you. Somebody somewhere is rolling in their grave at hearing me say that. But studying that anatomy is not. I liken it to like memorizing the dates of a battle during the Civil War.
Wow.
Like,
okay.
Not really what's important about studying the Civil War. You know, like knowing that anatomy is important because it will give you the foundation for which to understand it. But if you can just get your head around the idea that, you know, your lower body affects your upper body, which affects your lower body, which affects your upper body, that's what's important.
Okay.
The concept is more important than the technical anatomy of it.
Okay, cool.
Somewhere, somebody is tearing their skin off. Like someone is like sensing a disturbance in the force. But I mean, that's a much more realistic, practical approach.
Okay, cool.
All right. Bringing that up to Mo, actually, I'd be curious because he actually will go through this stuff with you because that's his job.
Right.
And, you know, maybe it's Mo. Maybe Mo's sitting at home right now petting his cat and he's like, somebody said something. All right. So that's the important thing there. Now, you're going to see a review of all those agonists and antagonist muscles, and it'll have their origins and insertions again. You'll see that muscle action list in this textbook as well, just like your other one. So for a full list, refer back to your textbook. But the last little bit we got to look at, we always end with this, is talking about motor behavior, right? How we actually move. Again, in my opinion, this is the important stuff, right? Like this is how we learn good or bad habits. Oh, go back. Where'd I go? There it is. So motor behavior. Behavior, motor behavior is going to be the body's response to internal or external stimuli, right? It is consistently made up of motor control, motor learning, and motor development, which missed my E. You guys will recognize. So motor control is how the nervous system integrates information with previous experiences, right? So as it gets information coming in, let's say you're standing on one leg, for instance, right? As the information comes in that there's now more pressure on this leg than this one, or maybe that I'm tilting in one direction, right? And gravity is still pulling downwards. I'm experiencing like more gravity here and less gravity here, right? My body's going to like interpret that information and go, oh, well, last time we contracted for this much force, and that brought us back to neutral. So that's your motor control. And then the motor learning is how we kind of get there, right? That is the development of motor control through practice and experience, right? So you develop more and more motor. You are constantly motor learning, which is giving you whatever type of motor control you have. You know, you look at it like like an infant trying to learn how to walk for the first time. They start by learning how to stand. They keep falling back onto their butt like over and over and over and over and over again. But their nervous system is like, okay, let's try this. Wham! Nope, that wasn't it. All right, let's try this. Right? Like that's motor learning. And then like it's like that's the one that worked. And then all of a sudden the baby knows how to stand. Then they try to take their first step. Wham! Like hit the ground. And everybody's like, all right, big failure. Let's get back up. We know how to stand now. Let's try left foot again. You know, like, and it's slowly developing that motor learning. And then motor development is basically all of that happening over the course of your lifetime. It's your motor learning that you experience throughout your life. So that is the change in motor behavior over one's lifetime. And I think it's always really important to remind our clients, like, and you guys, you know, I've had students like somewhat recently ask me these questions. You hear this kind of stuff all the time. You know, how long is it going to take? You know, I've got excessive knee valgus. How long is it going to take to fix? Well, that's a really hard question to answer, but you got to remember you have motor developed to have knee valgus for a long time. It's not going to go away overnight just from a couple like exercises, you know? If you are protracting your shoulders all day, like 8 hours a day, like at a computer, you know, 1 hour in the gym is gonna help, but like if you're not incorporating just a couple times a day, like standing up and like stretching everything out, if it's not becoming like part of your life, it's not really gonna get that much better quickly. It's gonna take a long time. So, you know, that's kind of why I always like to remind my clients of like motor control. It's like you've been working on this poor posture your whole life. We've been working on fixing it for 2 weeks at this point. You know, this stuff does take time. So motor control is how you use sensory information to produce a skilled response. And that obviously becomes really important when we're talking about athletics, you know. Talk to any pro baseball player, you know, and they know exactly, like a pitcher in particular, when they get that ball in their hand, they know exactly where to move the laces to without really even thinking about it to throw whatever type of throw they're going to have, you know? Like when I'm playing Frisbee, I used to, when I was first learning how to do like a forehand, like flick, it took me a really long time to remember, like I have to keep my fingers together and do what's like called like a pistol grip. and then like slide my middle finger to the front side of the disc. But now, like once it's in my hand, I don't even think about any of that stuff. You know, I can go from like a backhand position, flip it over and get rid of it all in one fluid movement. And that involves like dropping, like letting go of the disc halfway so that my hand slides to the front. That all happens lightning fast because I've done it so many times. I've developed the motor control to do it. Same thing is true with like a football player. Watching slow motion, an NFL player catch a football and then make like a turn with that ball the second they've got it so they can tuck it laces side, whatever they're most comfortable with, into the side of their arm. They do those motions like that becomes second nature, you know? And that's all awesome. But on the flip side of things, when you sit in the car and your leg goes straight to this crap position, you know, like it is a really effective way to drive, but this is horrendous posture, you know? And so then your brain gets so used to it. Let's say you go to the park to feed birds. Why is that my example? And you sit down, you're not driving, and yet you maybe get dumb leg, you know? That's all part of like motor control and motor learning and motor development. So we got to remember, like, this is all part of stuff. That's why these habits are so hard to control. And so motor control, you know, all the sensory information coming in, how your synergists are supposed to work together, and your proprioception, we have a term for that. We call all of that your sensory motor integration. It's taking all the information in and sending out the appropriate response. That's integrating your experiences together. So
I was literally,
oh, go ahead.
I was literally just sitting like that, and you said that, and I was like, oh.
Right? Dude, it's so hard. I mean, like, I can't tell you, I can see myself up here in the corner, right? I can't tell you how many times during like these lessons, I notice I'll do this. I'm like, mother trucker. And I see it. And I'm like, you dummy. And it's always to my right. I always sit into my right. Very rarely sit into my left. You can even see, like, look at how much more flexible if I try to shift from one side to another. Like, I go so much further on this one because I do it so often. Yeah.
Yep. Me too.
I think it's you will go if you try to like analyze this stuff for your own body constantly. It's like, yeah, awareness is good, but like I feel like it'll just slowly drive you mad. Just like how much? Okay, I'm gonna like.
It's like it's like super awareness now, and then I always catching myself like doing things.
Totally. Ugh.
Yep.
All right. So that is about it. The one last little bit we've got here is we talk about our internal versus external feedback. This is how we coach our clients, right? Internal feedback is all of your sensory information. That's what somebody's feeling while they're doing the exercise. So you can't really make somebody have internal feedback, but a good way is to like remind them and be like, do you feel how that's different than what you were doing before? And they go, yeah, okay, I'm starting to notice a difference, right? You're helping them develop that awareness. But external feedback is one that we have a lot of control over, right? External feedback is feedback from an external source. This is you being pulled back, being able to observe from the outside, right? So there's two parts of this. There's knowledge of results and knowledge of performance. Knowledge of results is used after the movement is over to let them know about like the outcome of their performance. Like, all right, you hit the heart rate, go ahead and slow it down, or all right, that's enough reps, go ahead and take a break, right? Like that's knowledge of results. And then knowledge of performance is feedback about the quality. Like, hey, that looked really good. You had your chest upright more, your knees were in alignment, and you weren't elevating your shoulders, right? And that's about that, guys. I ain't got anything else for you. Any questions today? I know this is the review. The rest of it's new, I promise. Well, actually, it is program design, so a lot of it is actually quite familiar still. But that's the last of the anatomy stuff. Questions, comments, concerns?
No, sir.
All right. I'll stop hostage. By the way, Nancy, I see a happy birthday sign. Was it your birthday? Happy birthday. God dang it.
Goodness.
I won't do anything as cringy as like sing you a song, but congrats. Happy birthday.
Thank you.
Happy birthday.
Right? I
Thank
like saw
you.
the banner and I was like, I'm getting to that at the end of this lesson. I can't see it now, but it was like the moment.
Happy birthday.
Yeah,
All
thank
right.
you.
All right. Well, we'll see everybody tomorrow.